had next to no idea what Encanto was gonna be like. For as excited as I was and how hard I am on movie trailers that give away too much plot, Disney doesn't always have a great track record when it comes to trailers that don't give enough. But thankfully, the story of the magical family and the magical house, but with the one non-magical member, was a charming and joyous musical romp that just so happens to be a smaller scale family drama with a tint of mystery. It was already getting pretty positive buzz from the start, but since its home release has exploded in popularity in ways that many recent Disney movies haven't. Some of this is for practical reasons, like go figure, a story about generational tension, unappreciation, and stress hitting the population's emotions at this point in history. The fact that the movie is colorfully and incomprehensibly beautiful, and that Lin-Manuel Miranda's Colombian-flavored musical numbers are absolute bops that have earwormed their way into people's souls. I'm partial to Luisa's Surface Pressure for its relatable subject matter and its absolutely singable hook, but unsurprisingly, the closest to a villain song we don't talk about Alberto's dad has become Disney's biggest billboard hit since Let It Go. And if dems the rules, I guess this means that every movie in the future is going to force in a Bruno reference, of which Luca apparently got a head start. But can we also agree that like half of the appeal of the song is just Dolores' 20-second flow, and how that's a decent contender for best 20 seconds out of the entire movie? But that just accounts for its massive Spotify numbers. The encompassing factor for its success is, simplistically, what this movie does differently from other Disney or standard animated films. Which again, some of which is obvious. From just the concept of a Colombian magical realism family drama mystery, but with an emotional emphasis on how poor communication and hiding your pain in an effort to look strong can eat away at the unity of a group of people even if they love each other very much, or feelings of shame and pressure at measuring up to expectations, and even when you meet those expectations, the pressure to keep it up indefinitely. As such, many people have found its characters and themes to be incredibly relatable, and some of it is the small details, like the 7 different ways they utilize the motif of the butterfly, in visuals and in theme, Mirabelle's insane, enviable embroidery, the fact that Camilo's transformations are pretty much just jump cuts with follow-through. And amongst all of the great representation this is providing, I personally appreciate female characters with thicker builds and noticeably lower vocal registers. And we do see some growth where Disney is still lampshading some of its old cliches, but not quite as bluntly as in the recent past, both from the Alan Tudyk toucan
I went to Juilliard.
and Bruno's Rats are subtler riffs on the Disney animal sidekick trope. This also highlights another welcome deviation within the concept of superheroes, or at least superpowers, in a refreshing scenario where no one is hiding their identity and their job is to help the community, not to fight villains. How would that affect their upbringing, their personalities, and what mental stressors would accompany them? One of the things I picked up on right away was how much it must suck to be Tia Pepa. Because if she just is in a bad mood, creates a tornado, she could literally kill someone. This is someone who has been pressured consistently since she got her power to always be happy. There's also her mother and how she's likely pressured to constantly be cooking, because what if somebody gets into an accident and they're near death? And how has Dolores not gone insane with all of the sounds, being able to hear literally everything in what has to be like a mile to 5 mile radius? And if you consider that the first incarnation of Camilo was that he was an emo boy, that this jokester persona is an act, after likely being encouraged by Abuela to boost morale. So basically what we have is a whole family where everyone's joy emotion is a dictator. And is also a sign for why Abuela's treatment of Mirabelle is so baffling, because Camilo's job is to do basic chores. She can do chores. Actually, there is one movie that Encanto reminded me of that actually made me very happy.
Maybe you should leave the decorations to someone else?
Could you not be in mission control at all?
Another story with no real villain, but the plot is at least instigated by inter-family tension and poor communication, and everything is propelled forward by a well-meaning, perpetually positive and passionate pedestrian protagonist that feels left out of their extraordinary family. But here, part of the tragedy isn't just that Mirabelle feels left out. As established, Nearly everyone has their own burdens or stressors that contribute to the strain between the family members. But all of them are keeping it secret, or at least under control. Except for Mirabel, whose flaw or failure was done right in front of everyone, and became the first sign or signal that the power of the family is limited or waning. So Mirabel, in some members' eyes, becomes associated with the family's weakness, which means as more and more problems pile up, they become easier to pin them on Mirabel. Anyway, point is, Encanto's great. But it does make you wonder, with all that praise, if we're on the precipice of a backlash. Now, if you're just not talking about Bruno, even with its superior numbers, it's unlikely that it will at least get the same level of backlash as Let It Go did, if only because it's an ensemble song, which means it's not going to be as covered by every single person and their 5-year-old. This also seems to be more popular with adults than kids, and that's when the overplay really goes into overdrive. But the film? From the start, it was doing well critically, but there were some actual critiques, which is fine, because no movie is perfect. Now, some of these critiques I think was just a matter of people's expectations being thrown off balance, exacerbated by the trailer emphasizing some of the more exciting of the non-diegetic imagery, which unfortunately is more of a product of our very action-oriented marketing mentality that takes Ghibli movies and makes trailers that focus on the 5 minutes of fantastical action. But as said, Encanto is a family drama, not your typical animated adventure. It's not a journey or a quest between an unlikely duo. The story is mostly confined within the enchanted house, or at least the village, predominantly by one character having small moments with a larger core cast. This inherently will give the movie a different structure, sense of pacing, and flow of tension, because unlike seeing the relationship between two unlikely characters grow, these one-off moments of Mirabel and ex-family member are isolated, almost interchangeable, as if they could be presented in any order. But this is one of the things that I think is only off-putting on a first viewing, because it's so unusual and isn't really noticeable afterward, and otherwise it makes the movie feel much more unexpected and surprising by deviating from the formula, as in the end it still holds together by retaining the continuity of learned information. But the other byproduct, people just wanting to see more of the family, and I totally get why. Nearly every member could be the star of their own film, especially when the story's entire concept is how each one of them has their own hidden burdens and struggles. And maybe it's our superpower-saturated zeitgeist that makes us gravitate toward characters with powers, ironically creating the exact scenario talentless Miracle with a B is enduring in this film, being undervalued in favor of the extraordinary. I certainly understand people would have wanted to see some more evidence of any of these characters growing or having arcs like Isabella, even if the time just wouldn't have allowed for that. But part of the idea is that everyone was so distracted and focused on their own stuff and unwilling to communicate. Particularly, Antonio gets brought up a lot because he has a close bond with Mirabel, and he's well established at the start, and normal movie language dictates that an established character up front means that you play a bigger role later. Now, at first I wondered if that was part of Mirabel's tragic situation, that Antonio depended on her when he didn't have a gift, but then once he had a gift, he didn't need her anymore now that he was accepted. But even given its small character moments format, Antonio's brief reappearance actually speaks volumes, because for the entire time that Dolores knew that Bruno was still in the house, she didn't tell anyone. Either because she believed it was better for Bruno, or better for the family, or just wasn't comfortable getting involved. Either way, it's a result of the family's strained relations under Abuela's pressure. But Antonio, who had been emotionally supported by Mirabel, the minute he hears about the situation, goes to help. Plus, if Antonio had hung around for too long, when his character didn't really have anything to do, I guarantee he would have outstayed his welcome and become annoying after a while. And that goes for all of the family members. They have become so popular and are considered so interesting because they're underplayed. So there's all this fun potential speculation around what are both still pretty well-established characters for the amount of limited screen time they have, but ultimately still pretty blank slates. And that tends to be a common ingredient in a lot of franchises' favorite characters. And this encapsulates other similar critiques, how a lot of questions and clarifications are still left unanswered by the end. It's not made perfectly clear how the magic works, or even why Mirabel didn't get a gift. But that's often the nature of stories of magical realism. A lot of them are meant to be interpretable and metaphorical, and/or makes for prime theory fodder, which is propelling a lot of the current conversation around the movie. The popular theories propose that Mirabel is meant to be the new matriarch like Abuela, who also doesn't have a power. And if the rooms are theoretically spaces to hone their magic, that Mirabel's room is the whole house since her gift involves supporting other people. Basically, that the family is the talent and Mirabel is the manager, or as Howard Hope put it, the conductor of a madrigal family. But theoretically, if Mirabel did technically have a gift, that it would probably be the ability to perceive others' emotions by the way of the non-diegetic visuals of the film. That, of course, now would be diegetic. I also wondered whether or not Mirabel had maybe a closer bond with the house than the others did. But that's hard to claim because of the screen time. We don't see the house interact much with everyone else, but the other family members have powers that they probably rely on more. But that's only if everything the magic has done has been deliberate. And personally, infallible divine entities are no fun. And what, did the magic? I was about to write see the future and duh. Still, I prefer the symbolic representation of how friction in the family unit drips down and affects children's development. Mirabel's situation could be representative of a number of experiences that boil down to feeling unexceptional, unfulfilled, unrecognized, or out of place with the ones around them. This also brings up images of children who have felt the need to earn their parents' love through accomplishments, including the garden variety coming-of-age late bloomer, because children are expected to hit certain milestones at the time when it is most convenient for the adults, and if they don't, then they are deemed failures. In big houses, young children are raised in the nursery until they come of age and get their own room, which in Encanto is the ceremony where madrigals get their powers. But since Mirabel didn't get one, she didn't just not receive a power, it meant that she had to remain in the nursery. So in the eyes of the family, she never fully became an adult, which is why no one relies on her. Honestly, if I had to identify a core irritant, I would attribute that to the parts of this film that are still trying to be too conventional. Like, the most frequent pacing critique is that the movie's ending feels like it comes on too fast, which wouldn't have been a problem if the movie didn't have to clock at 90, but we'll get to that. But another iffy attribute is the movie needing to have all of these action-adventure bits that are weakly narratively relevant, when otherwise the movie has been doing perfectly fine allowing the visual and musical energy to drive the excitement and entertainment. Particularly the one scene that feels kind of superfluous and padded to me is Bruno's room. Almost like it's a compromise to the kind of people who would go, this movie needs an adventure thing, we can't have an animated family movie without an adventure thing, if only just to put in the trailer. Sometimes movies do have scenes that don't serve a lot of narrative function other than what the movie might need tonally. Like, we need a funny pick-me-up here, or we need a moment to catch our breath. I mean, tell me what the narrative purpose of Be Our Guest is, really. It's just that Be Our Guest is a really fun, iconic, visually intricate musical number, and this is basically 2 to 3 minutes of silence of Mirabel going in to retrieve a rock. So basically the scene is the equivalent of Kristoff in Frozen 2. It's not that the scene has no value, just not quite enough to warrant the amount of screen time it's taking up. I mean, I guess it makes Bruno as an entity look creepier, to give his reveal more punch, but that's exactly what We Don't Talk About Bruno is for. Or they wanted an instance of Mirabel doing a dangerous thing to prove how capable she is even without powers. Whereas a quicker and better integrated dose of action and tension is Mirabel chasing Bruno through the walls. And you know where this is the most nonsensical? Mirabel trying to get the candle when the house is falling apart. Like, why? Because it's the kinda sorta climax and we kinda need an action thing. And like Frozen 2, I understand that the reason why a lot of these exist is some of these being left over from previous drafts and not having enough time to do something new. And on that note, the deleted scenes are sometimes a great insight into the movie's creation process, though this time there's only a few interesting details. One is that Isabella used to have a boyfriend. which I'm glad they got rid of for multiple reasons, including that scene had the longest makeout scene in a Disney film, but also when you think about it, it's not totally necessary. If Abuela's whole thing is just about turning Isabela into a magical baby maker, it really shouldn't matter by who. I guess it's just that guy was really enthusiastic about having babies. The other detail inside of that deleted scene was when Isabela alludes that Mirabel has a tendency for telling on her, which I think makes a lot of sense given some issues that Mirabel must have with Isabela, but also gives us a more founded reason for Isabela's dislike of her, which in the current movie has no explanation. Though the implication is that Isabela is envious of Mirabel for not having the same family obligations that she does, or that she internalized Abuela's restrained hostility toward her. So, about Abuela. I think a quiet reconciliation between the generations, rather than manufacturing another sort of last-minute ticking clock action thing, because that happened way too much this year, was the right direction for this, especially since Abuela's flashback did manage to get a lot of people emotionally enough to validate it as a climax. But you still get your batch of lukewarm takes of Abuela needing to be held accountable. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with the broad sentiment of this, but I will also ask, is it that you think that the movie doesn't make clear enough that what Abuela did was messed up and terrible? And also, how? What, did you want her to be bodily thrown from the house or just yelled at more? Actually, that latter one might have done it. If there's something that would have made this more satisfying, it might have been not to just have Mirabel standing up to Abuela. Julieta has been pushing back on Abuela throughout the film, but honestly, there should have been a massive family fight, where all the secrets come tumbling out, and that's what makes the house fall apart. And after seeing all of these things that everyone has been hiding, really makes clear to Abuela how much her pressure has been hurting them. Because I don't actually think the problem here is Abuela not being punished enough. I just think it's another case of, in a story that has superpowered individuals, somehow the most unbelievable element is the older person in a position of power that actually admits that they were wrong in a timely and efficient manner. The suspension of disbelief is just too great. And I can only think the reason they didn't do that was because nobody thought of it, or that Disney just wanted to limit the amount of family yelling. Or is it that it suddenly wouldn't have made sense for the prophecy to only feature Mirabel? Who cares? She still started it. It's always the prophecy's fault. This is why there's such frustrating narrative devices. Though honestly, I think that Encanto still probably is one of the best uses of it. Besides, the prophecy isn't actually about Mirabel breaking the house, it's her healing the house, which honestly has the same problem. And that's our last minor point. Some people get really hung up on the fact that Mirabel didn't get a gift. I don't know, maybe because the entire point of the film is that Mirabel is still worthwhile without one? But more about whether all the other family members should have gotten their powers back. Which kind of sounds like the should Joe have died at the end of Soul question from last year, which I've given my take on, but here kind of depends on your interpretation of what the powers represent. Because arguably it's part of who they are and even their family bond. They lost it when the family fractured, and it's back once they did the work to make it whole again. And I have dwelled way too much on what are extremely minor grievances in what is otherwise a really fantastic film. Sure, it's fun to speculate on how this movie could have been different, but what really makes me happy is that despite all of these details that could be perceived as problems, there's still such an enormous amount of Encanto celebration at least going on right now. Because for so many people, Encanto managed to get the most important things right. Amazing music, themes, characters, visuals, all things that can keep a film afloat even if the story is weak. And the story isn't weak. If anything, it's that there's too much potential here that it couldn't be contained, and people want more. So, good news, it's very likely we're gonna get more. So, Animaniacs, tell me, how did you feel about Encanto? And again, we play the how long until I get the end of the year list up.